Coffee with the Editor is proudly brought to you by IRZ.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippa. Yes, well, as you know, my name is Seyi Osiyemi A. I'm a transportation professional. I've spent about 20 odd years in the industry. I've got a master's degree in transportation planning from Oxford Brookes University. I worked across different countries, being involved in planning, management and operations of transport systems. Started off my transportation career in the UK, spent about 7 years in the UK and moved to Australia in 2006, where I was, at that time, there was a big infrastructure boom in Australia. I lived in Brisbane. I was basically involved in project management of transport infrastructure as well as managing long-term transport planning studies because at the time Australia was undergoing massive growth in terms of population. So there were new areas opening up. There was a need to obviously put in place long-term transportation plans, some 10, 20 years, preserving future strategic corridors for transport infrastructure like rail, bus rapid transit, roads. Did that until 2012, when I decided to take a dive back to Africa. I'm Nigerian. I was born in Lagos. Moved to Uganda in 2012. I was headhunted to work with a startup company involved in bus operations that has just been awarded license by the Kampala City Authority in Uganda. The bus company had 100 buses with a plan to increase to about 240. I did that for about a year. Things didn't go well. Obviously, African where we do things. Coming after spending about 15 years in the Western world. So I then in 2014, I was offered a role to come back home to Lagos to head the operations for a state-owned bus company called Lagbus Asset Management Company. I've been doing that until recently when the government decided that it was no more interested in running buses, will rather be a regulator. So my role is now kind of transitioned into a regulatory role rather than bus operations. So that's all I've done in the last 20 years.
Okay, so now you're based in Nigeria now?
Yes, I'm based in Lagos. I'm the CEO for a state agency called the Lagos Bus Services Limited. Lagos State Bus Services Limited is a state-owned company that was created as part of a government, what we call bus reform project. And the agency was created to regulate the operations of public transport services in Lagos. So what the government was trying to do is put in some regulatory framework that would encourage private sector participation in bus operations. Because prior to then, the state has always been involved in bus operations. So the state was saying, we don't want to do that anymore. We want to do it through private sector partnerships. And then Lagos State Bus Services Limited will be responsible for issuing franchise licenses to prospective operators and regulating their operations. So, and part of that project was obviously the enactment of the Lagos State Transport Reform Law, under which the company was created. In addition to that, there was government decided to invest in acquisition of 820 high capacity and medium capacity buses. Also, construction of 3 bus depots all fully equipped. So that was the plan from the government side.
How is public transport like in Nigeria being managed? So you have a bus system. You've now, I mean, what does the rail system look like? So we hear quite a lot coming through, but you know, are people using trains?
Yeah, to be honest, our rail sector is relatively, it's not relatively, it's massively underdeveloped. We've had colonial rail lines built in the colonial era, some traversing the north and south of the country, and mostly narrow gauge rail lines, which primarily were developed at that time for movement of goods through the port. And so it connects Lagos. The major one is what they call the Lagos-Kano rail line, which is about 1,800 kilometers. There's been efforts recently, which started from the past administration, the federal, because we have a law in Nigeria which vests the development and operations of railways in the federal government through the National Railways Corporation. So as it is, it's only the government that can run railways in Nigeria. The law has been in place since 1956. So in 1955, it's called the Railways Act of 1955. Efforts have been made in past administration as well to change that law so that it would encourage private sector investment in railway development in Nigeria. That has not been done. So nothing much. So all the development and investment we've seen recently has been on the part of government. So government is spending a whole lot of money. A whole lot of money has been spent in the last 7 years to develop our railway infrastructure. A couple of lines have been opened up. We've got the Abuja to Kaduna rail line. Also, sections of the Lagos to Kano rail lines are also being upgraded in some sort of in stages. So, but it's in terms of rail for urban transportation, that is really non-existent at this point in time. Previous attempts by government in 1983, so in the early 80s, there was an attempt by the state government in Lagos to develop what they call the metro line, but that project was cancelled because of the change. There was a military coup, that military government that came in, and that project was cancelled. That project now, parts of that project is now being kind of resuscitated by current administration. There is no line. It connects Marina, which is on the island, one of the central parts of the Lagos Central Business District, to the eastern parts of Lagos. So the construction has been slow. Obviously, you would agree with me that it requires a lot of financial investment to build rail lines. And that obviously is meant to serve as an urban transportation, part of a mass transit transport system. So, but the other efforts by the federal government, it's a long distance travel. And I've always been of the view that it doesn't make any economic sense to build 1,000 kilometers rail line. Who is going to sit on the, because currently a trip from Lagos to Kano on that railway takes over 10 hours. Who is going to sit on the rail line for 10, on the railway for 10 hours in 2019? And you would agree that in some parts of the world, by rail than to travel by plane. So it's building rail infrastructure is not a problem. The cost of maintaining and operating the railway is actually where the bigger problem lies. We obviously need to make up our mind as a nation, and I think it seems sort of confused to what we want to do with our rail line. Are we developing a railway for freight, which I think it's okay. Roads are also relatively underdeveloped. There is a lot of freight being moved on roads. We have largely bad roads in Nigeria as well. So it makes sense to move a lot of freight on rail. So if that's what we want to do, then let's focus on developing the rail for freight. But as it is right now, the policy is a bit, we have some sort of no clear policy or no clear ideology on what we actually want to do with our rail system. It just goes beyond just building railways. What is the end game? And I think that is lacking.
Public transport and your view on public transport in Africa.
Africa is still very much behind the rest of the world in terms of public transport development. And I feel a lot can still be done because as we know, public transport has some sort of there is a social aspect to public transportation. And you're basically to provide for people who are most vulnerable, who are low income, from low income groups, which predominantly is, you can find that group. We have a lot of that group within Africa. So there is need to ensure that public transportation, we have to provide decent public transport for our people. And compared to the rest of the world, people in Africa are still paying far more than their peers in the rest of the world in terms of public transportation. So affordability is also an issue. Most African cities do not have proper regulatory framework for public transport system. So public transport basically is left in the hands of market forces to determine. So when you say market forces, we've got these fragmented transport unions who have all these taxis and charging basically what they think it's market price for providing a service. And you can't blame them because they are entrepreneurs in quotes. So they have to make ends meet. But where does that leave the commuter? Where does that leave the low-income earners in Africa? So there is, and I think that's why most international agencies are quite focused on Africa, because there is a connection between transportation and poverty in terms of empowerment and access to jobs. So there is a lot that needs to be done. And I think focus also should be on cheap public transport solutions rather than expensive transport infrastructure that might be very difficult to maintain over the long period of time. You now see emergence of development of things like bus rapid transit, which is seen as a cheap transport solutions than to probably railways.
Do you consider it a cheaper alternative? Do you think a BRT is cheaper than a rail?
Yes, it is. If you look at the cost of building BRT per kilometer compared to railways, and the cost of operation over a period of time, BRT is definitely cheaper. And
even
so,
like a tram system or a monorail system.
It is in the scale. BRT is seen as the cheapest, will be followed by tram system, then followed by your heavy rail system. So it's and we need to come up with solutions that will work for us. Yes, it doesn't mean that the rail will not be necessary, but you can start off. There is nothing stopping us from building BRT systems which allows it to be upgraded into a rail. Infinite is what is required. But in the first instance, you could start off with a dedicated corridor for bus rapid transit systems and upgrade over a period of time. So it's cheaper, and a lot of effort is also been put into that aspect, into BRT development across the African cities. And I know South Africa, a lot of South African cities have gone past of BRT, even though there are issues around operations of some of those BRT systems as well. Lagos, for example, we have a BRT system. We're still looking to develop more, and we also should not forget what you see as ride sharing in the mobility industry, especially the use of informal transport in ride sharing, like your motorbikes. That is also gaining a lot of traction in a lot of African cities. And so in Lagos, for example, we have some companies where you can book the use of motorbike on a mobile app. And that is also coming up very quickly. Even in Kampala, there's a company called Safe Border, which same principle, just like you do your Uber cars, you can book a motorbike. So those are the things that are coming up, and we need to recognize our economic realities. We are not going to develop at the same pace as most of the Western nations did. Yeah. And we still have largely unemployed population. And if this means of transportation provides some sort of livelihood to these people, then what government should be talking about is how can we make these mobility providers, how can we harness the emergent and have them as part of an integrated transport system. So that's where the conversation should be. And we had some cities are taking some sort of draconian approach in banning the use of motorbikes or public transportation. I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think we should see how we can leverage on the use of this technology and the use of these systems, mobility solutions. So that's my impression of Africa. There's still a lot that needs to be done. I think, as I said, affordability is a big, big, big issue. Here locally in Lagos, people spend as much as about 60% of their monthly income on travel. That is just not acceptable. How will government ensure that it provides decent, affordable transportation to the people? Should be the concern of leaders of African cities.
Absolutely. So you're currently looking after buses.
Yes.
Okay. So, and in your system, how many buses do you have? How many people do you transport?
Currently, because I'm not really operating buses anymore. We're not, like I said, my role is transitioning into some sort of regulatory role, regulatory function. But in Lagos, in terms of high capacity regulated public transport system, in total, we probably have about 700 in total. But aside from that 700, we have close to another 20,000 plus minibuses, which you guys call taxis in South Africa.
Yeah.
So that's what we have. Also, thousands of other mini bikes roaming the streets of Lagos. Yeah. That's the situation in Lagos. But like I said earlier on, state is invested in acquisition of another 800 buses, which we feel should have a huge impact. If you look at the number of buses we have as against the population, ideally the rule of thumb is like 1,000 people to one bus. So you go to a place like London with 8,000 people, they've got about 8,000 buses. Singapore, about 6 million, about 6,000 buses there. Like I said, the only regulated buses we have, they're only about 700, and the population of Lagos is probably range between, depending on where you ask, between 17 and 20 million people.
Wow.
So we still have the public transport system heavily dominated by informal transport operators. So at least about 75% of public transport trips done in Lagos are done using informal transport systems.
And what do you think that kind of impact is on the economy?
It has a huge impact. For example, the cost of congestion in Lagos is put at about $1 billion a year. That is huge. People spend endless amount of time in traffic. We haven't developed to the point where, apart from the BRT corridor, we really don't have like bus lanes that give priority to buses and reduce people's journey time. So there's still a lot of people trying to drive their cars, people doing car sharing. And when I say car sharing, not ride sharing per se, it's car sharing. I've got a neighbor, we're traveling along the same route. I've got a colleague at work, I can each ride with a colleague. So it's the amount of time people spend commuting in Lagos, it's really some people spend as long as 4 or 5 hours a day commuting.
Wow.
That is 5 hours of unproductive time. So it's carry on.
Sorry, but also the economic impacts. So aside from the length of time and the congestion and all the rest of it, I mean, if the majority are using an informal
yes, okay. Yes, that's the thing.
Yeah,
exactly. And also, because you have a public transport system held in the hands of informal operators, it also doesn't give visibility for government, and it's a huge source of revenue, even for that government is losing outrun because you have the unions, nobody really knows how so they stand at the parks collecting money from operators, not paying taxes to government. So in rough estimate, the industry is about 300 billion naira, which is close to about $1 billion a year of revenue exchanging hands amongst informal transport operators, of which government has no visibility. And I think that is something that has to change. But the only way you can bring about that change is also trying to reform the informal transport system. And when we say reform, people tend to think that is just taking them out and killing their business. No, it's not that. You could still find a role for these people in the sector. But how do you bring them in? How does government begin to have a clear insight into what is going on? And then how do you begin to put them under some form of regulation? They use minibuses. The reality is you're not going to drive a 12-meter bus across every nook and cranny of the city. So there will still be some places where minibuses will be what is appropriate as a form of public transportation. And we cannot lose sight of that.
So your change into a regulatory role now, will that involve some of the things that we're discussing now in terms of integrating that public transport, maybe looking at a way of automating fare collection, whether it's a minibus taxi or an Uber environment or a bus or eventually a train? I mean, is that where you're heading? Is that the direction you're heading in now?
Yes, because part of the buses with the government, one of the conditions we're working with is that these buses would have some form of automated fare collection system. On the BRC system we have, the operator does have a payment system in place. But like I said, beyond the regulated part, how do you bring in the informal sector into this kind of arrangement? And it's going to be a hard sell. It's been tried before. I know there was a trial. Google had some sort of initiative. I think it's called Bibo or something in Nairobi with the Matatu operators, where they were going to be paying with smart cards and the rest. But I think the system, the initiative collapsed maybe after about a year or two. Obviously, there were reasons for that. Some said, well, the operators there was no buying, they didn't see what was in it for them, and they were not really supportive. So there's been trials, but there's also been success. That failed, but there's been success in other places. There's some parts of India where you can pay with a smart card on an auto rickshaw, a tricycle. Yes, we can talk about where it's failed, but there are learnings we can pick up from other places. India, I think, is one of the places that has done well in terms of trying to integrate its informal transport system with mainstream public transportation system. So it can't be done. I think it's a political will. And then how there's no straightforward answer. I think we just need to find it will require high level of stakeholder engagement and negotiation on the part of the regulator and the operator. And there must be sincerity in what we do. And I think that's something that is always lacking because people approach this with some sort of, the operators, the informal operators always approach this thinking the government has some sort of ulterior motive and are not being sincere in whatever they're trying to do. So there is some level of transparency engaging with informal operators. And reforming informal operators, reforming the transport system is a process, is not an event. We've had political leaderships who believe that it's something that can be done, achieved in 1-2 years, and that's it. No, it's a process. And even in places where they've been able to successfully incorporate informal operators into the formal system, it's gone through a process. It takes time. So those are the things that we need to understand and focus on.
Okay, so the one thing that I am quite excited about is that I see your Minister for Transport is he seems to be very active, you know, and I see him on site, whether it's a picture opportunity or not, and I do see him doing things and being involved. Is that just a perception, or is that really how it is?
It's not a perception. I think that is how it is. I think to him, he's also that kind of person who tries to get his hands dirty and get into the thick of things. And honestly, the truth is there is a lot being done by this administration in terms of rail development. It's now, previous administrations have spent a lot of time trying to develop a framework on how we're going to go about rehabilitation of our railways. Now, what this administration has done, which is good, is now trying to build on what is done in the past.
Yes.
And then move on with that, which is good. There needs to be government is a continuum. There needs to be continuity in governance, and things like transportation should never be politicized because it has huge economic ramifications. If we can't develop our transport system, then that would ultimately also slow down our economic development. So there is a lot of focus on infrastructure. As you know, Nigeria has just gone through economic recession. And part of that is, and part of the economic strategy, getting Nigeria out of recession, is also government spending in infrastructure development. So, and part of the majority of that infrastructure development is in transportation. So there is a lot of focus on transportation. Hence the reason why you seeing the minister around, checking on the projects and ensuring that they are moving on as planned. So it is. Transport is, because it's something that touches people. So politically also, it's something that is appealing to politicians because and this is not unique to Africa. This is every part of the world. Every politician wants to be, exactly. You're very right. Every politician wants to be seen associated with commissioning of the transport-related projects, because at the end of the day, the only very few things that get to the heart, that gets to the grassroots, and public transportation is one of them. People need to move, people need to commute. As I say, transport is a derived demand. People don't travel just for the sake of traveling. You just don't get on the bus because you want to get on the bus. You get on the bus because you have to do something. You have to access jobs, you have to access services, and you need to use public transportation. So yes, so it's only expected that politicians take it very seriously.
So do you think there's still like stigma attached to not having one's own car but making use of a bus or a train environment or public transport as an only means of moving around? Do you think there's still quite a lot of stigma attached to that in Africa? Because when I've visited overseas, everybody seems to use the bus, the tram, the train, and nobody uses that mileage.
There is still a stigma. It's the stigma, and I don't think we can hide that. But we also need to understand where we're coming from. Even in the Western world, it was a stigma 30 years ago. I'm sure, I don't know whether you know, the late UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher once said, if you're caught on a bus at the age of 30, then you must be how did she put it? You must be somebody who is a loser in life. So that was the UK Prime Minister saying. She actually, I don't know the right words to use, but that was what she insinuated, that you consider yourself a loser if you're caught on the bus at the age of 30. This was the UK Prime Minister saying that some 30 years ago. Yeah, but down the line, everybody gets on the bus in the UK. In the Western world, the same. You go to Amsterdam, you go to Stockholm, you go to all major European cities. It's like that. So for us, a car is still seen as a status symbol. It's relatively expensive to own a car in Nigeria, for example. We have a high import duty, especially for cars. It's about 70% duty to import a car into Nigeria. So it's expensive. You so it's but people leave school, start work, and the first thing they're aiming to do is to buy their first car. That is still the mentality here. And but slowly, people are now beginning to see that using public transportation does not connote any kind of lack of success. And there are lots of people who would like to use public transport if it's decent and affordable. And car ownership, if you compare to a car ownership, I think it's one car for every 7 households in Lagos, for example, which is very low.
Yeah.
If you compare it to a place like Finland, which is like 1.2 per household.
Yeah.
So our ownership level is low. And but what you then get to find is you could then have a family who have 2 or 3 cars. I think as government, we just need to keep working to ensure that we provide decent public transportation. People will use it. We've had experience when we were running buses. We had a park and ride facility with a bus, air conditioned, and people used to park their car and get on the bus. People were doing that, and so it's been proven that if you provide the service, people will use it.
Does Nigeria have? I'm just looking through your LinkedIn profile here. The proposed Lagos state transport policy, is that approved? What policies are there around public transport?
Okay, sometime last quarter of 2018, the State Ministry of Transportation set up a committee, and the role of the committee was to develop a policy for a transport policy for Lagos State. You start to note that we are a city of 17 million people, and we do not have a transport policy.
Okay.
Maybe it's an oversight or deliberate, we don't know. But anyway, the current administration now decided, well, we're going to try and put one in place. The committee went through a process of public consultation, receiving representations from the public, and then they had a public forum about it. We're expecting the final version to be put out anytime soon. Obviously, the role of the policy is to set up a framework for public transport in Lagos, looking at all areas of the transport system. So we talked about ride sharing. What does that mean for us? How do we leverage on these tech entrepreneurs who are coming up with all these, who are trying to disrupt the transport system, the public transport space. Even in terms of technology, what do we want to do? There are talks about electric buses, autonomous vehicles. Obviously, that's not our problem at this point in time. I keep telling people autonomous vehicles are more important to Western world because the most expensive part, in terms of cost of running bus operations in the Western world, wages and salaries is actually the highest. In some operations accounts for 30-35%, whereas wages only accounts for less than 10% of cost of operations here locally. Our biggest cost is diesel, and that accounts for about 35% of our operations. But over there in the Western world, in the UK, for example, bus operators get what they call fuel duty rebates. So nothing like that is applicable here. But things like electric buses, is that something we should be looking at in future? Or is the issue around the environmental impact of diesel engines? Do we want to do that? How do we train our personnel? It's all a policy. It doesn't have to happen now, but we need to get ourselves ready because some of the diesel engine buses we use here, what would happen is next 10 years, we might not be able to find parts to maintain them anymore because most of these auto manufacturers are actually switching away from diesel engine vehicles. So then what then happens to us? We need to get ourselves thinking in that direction. So we're expecting the policy to be out anytime soon.
Is there anything else you want to share with me and the audience of Railways Africa?
Lagos is largest city in the sub-Saharan Africa. We're trying to, there's a lot of challenge. We have huge, massive urban migration, high unemployment, high cost of transportation. So the huge challenge we need to deal with. But having said that, we're making progress. We're one of the first countries in Africa to build a BRT system. Corridors are currently being built as we speak. We're investing in real infrastructure, both at the national and at the state level. We see transportation as a backbone to the economy, especially in Lagos State. The reality is we cannot make any economic progress without fixing our transportation system. Glad and good to know that, as you know, we're going in transition right now. We have a new administration coming in on the 29th of May. And that new administration as well has been speaking a lot about transportation. So a lot of things have been done by the current administration, investment in buses, construction of depots, construction of even bus terminals, new bus stops. What now we should be doing is how we're going to leverage on some of those things to continue to drive the transportation agenda. So we are trying our best, be a leader for our African peers, and we're also open to learning from other African cities on what they're doing, knowledge sharing, ultimately to make the city a better place.